Okay, this is John Gonder for Chabot and Las Positas Colleges on a quest to create a new how-to video on writing good reports. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the background of writing and where I got my rubric and how it works, and then a step-by-step on how to do a good report according to the way I define it for my classes. And first, just a quick reminder, really the thing about this is we're learning how to think. So regardless of what the ideas are, regardless of what the concepts or the lab work is or whatever, the point is to get you to the point where you are thinking better, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating good stuff. Well, so first of all, why me? What do I know? Well, basically, I've been around a while, and I've done a bunch of stuff, and I've been trained in a lot of different ways by a lot of different people over time, but there's a lot of commonalities about that, whether it was as a certified internet webmaster, whether it was within the discipline of project management, or as server administration for IBM, Dell, Apple, whether it's within computer forensic investigation, penetration testing, whether it is working with networks and routers and, whatever. The commonalities relate to what you will learn in organizing, presenting, and putting forward in a good way information that you gather. One of the little-known secrets of tech is there is a real dearth of people who can actually write, and yet it's really needed. You can see from this list that I have here just a few things from NASA. NASA considers it important enough to spend a lot of time writing about writing, how to do good reports, how to do good technical writing, because your information is not of any use if you can't bring it to the people who hired you to get it, and if they can't understand the form in which you're presenting it. So that is ultimately what you're practicing, even if you're just doing a lab for this particular week. The goal is to be able to do well in your career. Finding, gathering, organizing, and presenting information is going to be useful everywhere you go. A minimum qualification for all kinds of things is going to be written right out. The ability to effectively write and convey in written and speech information regarding that job. I've been told time and time again by people who are on our advisory boards that they don't even really care if people can do all the tech things. If they can communicate well, writing and speaking, working with others, that is a really important qualification. You're going to find times in your career when the information you need to communicate is really important. And the ability to do it clearly and completely and understandably can have dramatic consequences, either positive or negative. Everywhere in the government, in every security agency, in every security area, there is the need to have good written communication. Like I said, NASA has put a lot of thought into creating documents to help people write well and to write clearly and to bring that information from one area where it's generated to another area where it's used. If you're interested in a little bit more about technical writing, this is a blog, Tales of a NASA Tech Writer. It's got a lot of really interesting things there. Technical writing comes under a number of different areas. Now, everywhere you use something, whether it is a washing machine or whether it's a piece of software, there's user manuals and guides There's technical books, assembly manuals, how to put things together, and then all kinds of scientific papers written when information is generated through research. There is room for you in this industry, and it's going to be needed anywhere you go, regardless of what you do. Maybe digging a ditch, you might not have to report about that, but most anything else, you're going to end up writing a report about it. So I've developed my idea of what constitutes good writing for my classes. It's not an English class, and so there's a lot of stuff I will not grade you for, although I might mention to you, because the point is, over time, as you do one report after another, you consistently get better at a lot of things that I hope maybe you had learned in your English composition class, but maybe not with reference to technical writing. I call the definition of good writing aspects mine C6 writing: clean, clear, crisp, concise, cogent, and complete. What does that mean? Well, grammar, spelling, and punctuation keep things clean. Good organization and an orderly presentation make things clear to the person that is reading this. Having it be crisp, unnecessary detail is not there. It's very businesslike. We write in the third person in our technical writing, and we make things organized step by step as we go through the information. Don't use a $10 word where a $2 word will do. And that's one of the reasons why you'll hear me say later it's important to read things out loud, because tremendously complex language will be difficult to read, and it will become obvious to you where it might not be so obvious when you're just reading it. Your word choice, your sentence construction are going to be the key to making things concise. You want it to be logical, and you want to think through what you're writing, and then again, as you edit it and look through it, making sure each aspect of it is thoughtful and logical. And you want it to be complete, and yet without anything extra. So nothing is missing, nothing extra. I call that Goldilocks writing. Not too much, not too little, just right. So the real world, it gets into much more detail about exactly how to produce a report that they want. And there are a lot of other pages, beginning pages, ending pages, and documentation that we don't make a use of in my classes. But you'll get the basics, and you'll get a chance to practice that C6 writing. So, how to do a Gonder report. What is my style guide and my requirements, and sort of where did they come from? Well, I developed it first of all from journalism, and we'll look at an example rubric and the Hirschberger rubric, which I used to develop my rubric, and then my scorecard and my checklist, which is used as a template and a template. In journalism, if you are writing well, you are holding to the who, what, why, where, when, and how very quickly. Usually in the first paragraph or two, you want to know who, what, why, where, when, and how. Extraneous stuff is not there. It's clean and clear. In science, we're organizing our information typically around what is our plan originally? What's the question that we're trying to answer? What is the goal that we're working toward? Because if we don't have a clear understanding of those things, then we can't move forward. And then, what is the methodology that we're using in order to conduct this experiment? And then, what are the observations that we make and the data that we gather? Now, that's without doing any interpretation or making conclusions. First of all, just the facts. Here's what the facts are. And then, in light of what our original question was, in light of what our original goal was, we interpret that data in our discussion area, and maybe we can come to some conclusions, or maybe not. What are the implications from our interpretation of that data? It's science, so sometimes we don't come to a good conclusion. Maybe all we have is more questions. But that's okay as long as they're new and better questions. We don't care. And the results of your lab may not be what you intended at first, because not everything can always be done every single time. It may not work. That's called science. And that's when you use your ability to think. And actually, negative information can be good information in science. It's okay. As you'll hear me when I talk about reports in class, I'll be saying, if you've tried to do the work and you've done it and you've documented what you did and you're describing it well and putting it down in the report, if you didn't find what you were looking for or you found something different, that's okay. That's science. So what was my process in determining the way I do things? Looking at that Hershberger rubric. Let's take a quick peek at that. We'll look at my rubric. And I had done some assembly of descriptions of what's a good writing level. And then we'll look at that scorecard and checklist and template that you can use for assembling your information from your lab in the right organizational order. In my search online for some rubrics a few years ago, I came across this rubric and score sheet that was put together by Rick Hershberger, and with his permission, I adapted it for my use. It's very detailed, and the idea here is you could score yourself, or I could score you on a lab, on each of the individual aspects of the lab work. The title, abstract, introduction, methodology, results, and discussion, for instance, can be graded on a scale, and this really, I saw it really clearly described what is the level at which it works, what are the levels at which it really doesn't work very well, and what are the differences between those levels. I figured that would be very important for people to be able to understand what constitutes a good title or a good methods section or a good introduction from one that's not so good, and be able to assess it themselves in order to improve their work over time. And all the documents that I'm referencing here or looking at, and some more examples and rubrics, are all here for you in the student resources area in a folder called Good Report Writing. So you can look at them more in depth, and again at your leisure, and examine more things more examples than we're actually going to look at in this how-to video. So I distilled that Hershberg and other rubrics down to a set of headings that I would call our usual way. And so when I say do it in the usual way and use these headings, here's what I mean for your report. You put your name and then a word count when you're done, a title and an abstract, which is only written at the end after you've done everything else, an introduction, your methods, results, and discussion. You may need some citations, and so there's a place for you to put citations if you need any. And one of the things I'll emphasize is, again, this is not an English class, so I don't care if it's perfect MLA format or whatever, so long as it gets across the idea that you quoted something that somebody else wrote, and here's where that came from. And then an appendix, which we rarely, if ever, need, but we'll nonetheless talk about a little bit in any case. So let's briefly talk about the definitions of each of those headings, each of those sections, as they're described in the checklist. I may give you an extra credit assignment to actually use this checklist and turn it in with regard to one or more assignments to give you the practice of actually going through and thinking again about what each of these sections means. So the title is actually, in essence, it is a summary of the introduction. The introduction states, well, what's the job? What's the goal? And is there any background that we need to know about this? It typically is fairly short, a few sentences or a paragraph, but it clearly states what's going on. Well, if this really has to be first, because if you don't understand what you're supposed to do, well, nothing else is going to work very well, is it? So doing the introduction first, based on your notes from the lecture or the other instructions for the lecture, that's the first thing to do. Well, other than your name, which you pretty much already know. But you want to do that introduction because that's going to be the basis for your title. The title is really a one-sentence description of the introduction. What is the title of this? Now, in scientific reporting, where you're reporting your research, say for instance on some new drug, the title is going to clearly state what you're doing, and the introduction is going to clearly state what the job was, what the goal was. Next is going to be, as you move and do your lab, as you go through things, the methods. So typically you're going to write this in a list format. In other words, 1, I rebooted the computer to make sure all the caches were clear, except I'm going to use third person. The computer was rebooted to clear caches. 2, it could be a list with numbers, it could be just a list in order. Why do we care? Well, this provides information so that this experiment could be repeated. This is a principle of science that if I find something out, in order for it to be validated, you need to be able to repeat that work and get the same result. So while we might not be trying to repeat your particular experiment in this lab, it's a principle of scientific reporting that your methods section should be, again, following the Goldilocks principle, not too much, not too little, just right. Just the right amount that gives us the detail necessary about your methods and your procedures so that we could repeat that experiment if we wanted to. And so as you do things, you'll be taking notes here. And that's the reason I created a template, which allows you to just put things in as you generate them. We'll look at that template again in a second. As you generate them in the right spot. Well, as you're putting down your methods, you're also likely to generate some results. And so that's where you might take some notes about what are the results, and then have some visuals like screenshots. So you might generate all the data first and then start chopping it up, taking a look inside, looking for things, creating some screenshots, putting that down. But the results section, again, is going to follow the Goldilocks principle of not too much, not too little, just right. So you might have a sentence or two describing your overall findings, and it contains all but no more of the results that are germane, and let me spell that right, because spelling is important, to answering the question and all the things that are going to be needed for your discussion section. So there'll be visuals that are appropriate to the data, and they're arranged in the order that tells the story. So you want to have a clearly understandable label and a description for each visual, and the structuring those things by summarizing in a sentence what's the point of the visual here in the results, what's the meaning and information, but not the discussion. That comes later. And you might support that summary of that visual by including a specific detail or details from the visual that are important for understanding the results. Why is this here? What's important about this particular piece of data? And then again, you will have watched and practiced with the how-to video of how to take good screenshots and to crop, size, format, label, title, and separate them to maximize the ease of viewing and understanding by the reader. Often we're creating information that's going to be used as a reference later, a baseline for network operation. So the ability to quickly and easily find again what we're looking for later when we reference this document and see it is very important. And again, that's what you get paid for. So we just report the data from the experiment, and we're avoiding explanations and conclusions about the data in the results section. Well, once we're all done with that, then we're ready to discuss the results that we have put in that results section in light of what the original question was. So we might start with an initial statement. Did we answer the question we had? Were we able to achieve the goal that was stated in the introduction? And then we demonstrate that by looking at the specific data in the results section as our evidence. And then we can use what was learned about our goal in this lab to explain why or why not our data answer our question or achieve our goal. Now, some of the things that also can happen in the discussion, remember I said it's science, so it may or may not work. Were there problems that occurred or uncertainty in the procedures or the data? How did this finding compared with other information? And can you explain that difference? And again, you might have suggestions for additional investigation that may further expand our understanding, especially if that data is not conclusive. Maybe it didn't work at all, but you've got an idea about another way that could be used to make it work. That's the discussion area. Then, if you've talked about things or you've made a quotation or brought in some information from a source, you can put that, and we'll give a couple examples of that when we're looking at some of the examples. You could put it as an inline citation, or you could add a citation section if necessary. If you have additional information that would be very useful to the reader, but it's not necessary for the discussion session, so you didn't put it in results, because only things that are necessary for the discussion are in results. But there's additional information you really want to append to this lab. That's where you'd use an appendix. Now, only when you're completely done with all this stuff do you write your abstract. Why? Because an abstract is essentially a sentence or two that summarizes what we were planning to do, how we did it, what we saw, and what we think it means. That's the abstract. If you've read any scientific papers, you know that's the case, because then, in short, and in tech, I call this the money ball. This is the executive summary section. This is for the bean counters that don't know anything about what you did or what it means. But this is what hopefully explains enough to them in English for humans that they write you a check, because of course that's the point. And then lastly, once you're done with all your editing, then you'll decide what the word count is going to be. And the reason is because we often have a requirement. Say, for instance, that it's going to be at least 600 words, but not more than 1,000. So we really want you to go into some level of detail, but not so much that it's going to put me to sleep when I try to read it. Now, one thing about these reports is when you go to put that stuff in Canvas, the screenshots should go inside the report, and the how-to video on doing good screenshots goes over how to do that inside Canvas. And then actually, are they good? So see the how-to video on taking good screenshots and then putting them inside the report. It can be very confusing and certainly isn't going to be good for your reader if you have a bunch of pictures out here somewhere and then here's your report. Your result number 1, figure number 1, which illustrates this. Then my discussion in reference to illustration 1, blah, 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 illustration 2. It's all there in one document. One document there in your submission. So your process is to use a template, and let's take a look at that template right now. So what I've done is write this all out in a text file for you. Name, word count, title, abstract, methods. So as you take notes and as you go along, you would just use this text file and throw things in here as you go. Obviously, first thing you want to do is you want to have your introduction written, because that, of course, is, what am I doing? And if you don't know what you're doing, you really can't get any farther. And then write yourself a title, and then get into it. And as you go along, you're going to make notes. Here's what I did. Here's what I did next. Here's what I did next. And it can be just a word or a phrase as you're doing your lab. You're just going to go back and edit that later, but you've got the information that you need in the right order and in the right section. As you find some results, you're going to start adding it in here. Maybe you have a screenshot you took and you cropped it and you got the right thing, you did an annotation. You're going to call that figure 1, and then you have a description for it. The trace showed blah. And this shows the IP address of the DHC server, figure 2, and so on in your results. And maybe you have an idea of something you want to talk about as you're doing these results. Now's the time to make a notation of a word or a phrase or a sentence in the discussion area. So then you remember that when you go and write your discussion area. Now, maybe as you're discussing this thing, you make a quote from something. As documented in RFC 1918 addresses, private addresses include blah, blah. Well, this is enough of a citation for me. You don't have to have an MLA citation in a citations section. But maybe you also are going to include a URL to where you found a piece of information. That's where you might, if you feel it's needed, add something into a citation section. But whatever quote you use in a discussion has to be credited in some way to its origin. So people get their due, and you don't get dinged for plagiarism, which is important. So that's the template, and there's one there. I typically include a copy of this in the lab materials for every lab. It just gives you a starting point. You wouldn't have to use this. You could do it any way you want, so long as you come out right in the end. But using this report template to put things down in as they occur, make notes, a word, a phrase, a sentence, throw an idea in there, throw an idea where it's going to go so you remember it later. As you're doing your organization and editing, I think it's very helpful to you, especially the first few times you do a lab, to help you get stuff in the right place and help it get well organized. So in your process, if you used a template and you did everything in the right order, writing your abstract last, for instance, and then maybe take a look at that checklist if you don't use it formally all the way through, just to make sure that you've got things well defined in each section. The next thing to do is to read it out loud. I can't emphasize this enough, that things that are clumsy, wording that's clumsy, sentences that are not really good, they're going to not read well when you read it out loud. You're so used to looking at it on the computer as you edit, it's very easy to overlook things. It's very easy to overlook grammar problems that are obvious when you try to read it out loud. You can really save yourself a lot of time and a lot of grief by doing that. And then, of course, the last thing to ask yourself is, if I gave this to you, would you write me a check for it? If this is something you were putting in to somebody that hired you to do this, do you think they would write you a check for that? Because, of course, that's the point. While I might very well make note of in feedback to you some comments about the grammar or the wording or things like that, I'm very unlikely to take points off for that. In my class, it's really about the content and what we're doing in the lab, and the perfection of your writing is outside the scope of this class. But nonetheless, I want to encourage you to continue to increase the quality of what you do as you go through the semester. All right, so you're going to write your stuff in a word processor, Then you're going to spell check it and grammar check it, and make sure to save it locally so you've got a copy of it. Don't lose stuff. And then as you edit the words and pictures, verify that you followed the directions of the lab. Make sure to read it out loud to yourself. Ask if you would write a check for it. Then go ahead and post it in Canvas, but you're not done. You need to double check everything. Go back into Canvas and see, does it look the way you thought it looked? Are those pictures inside the report as one document? And then if you're following the usual way and using these headings, name, word count, title, abstract, introduction, methods, results, discussion, you're going to be good to go. Now let's take a quick look at another document that's here in that folder for you. It's something I put together about what constitutes various levels of good writing. How do you tell the difference between something that's a level 5 and a level 1? Well, level 1 is difficult to understand. There's sentence fragments, spelling and other errors, generally does not follow the instructions. This is why I mentioned before, make sure that you follow the instructions. What's supposed to be the job of this lab? If you are supposed to find 5 things of a particular kind, did you find 3? Did you find 4? Did you get all 5? So review this good writing levels if you have any question about what might constitute the best, clear and concise, follows instructions to the letter, maybe looks beyond the assignment to the underlying concepts, and maybe also contains interesting new insights and thought based on your thinking, because that's what this is about. It's your thinking that we want to improve ultimately. Well, let's take a couple examples here and take a quick look at a couple. Now there's a whole bunch of examples in that folder, but we're only going to take a look at a couple. Several students over the last couple of years have written good stuff, and I've asked them if they would let me use their reports as examples. They're not necessarily perfect, and we may point out a couple ways in which they're perfect, but they're generally good. One of the organizational aspects that I didn't mention yet is, see how there's a white space here in between each of these sections? Notice how easy it is to tell the difference between one section and the next with your eye. Your eye moves very easily through this. The use of just simple, not fancy formatting, but just a couple of spaces in there really makes this clean and clear. So the name, title, Week 6 Kali Lab Report, there we go. In the introduction here, we're exploring Kali Linux, looking at 5 different tools. Now, this is not third person, is it? But that's not bad, and it's not an English class. Then there's an abstract designed to analyze Kali. In this lab, we're looking at Wireshark, ping command, etc., performing basic options with these tools. Visual representations include the display filters of each tool and the differences between them. So this abstract is quite good. It is, in a couple sentences here, a summary of each of the other sections written last. And then the methods, again, they don't have to be numbered, but in order, starting Kali, starting Wireshark, capturing packets, using a terminal shell, opening ZenMap. Each step is clearly indicated here, and it's short but complete. I could use this, I could give this to somebody and they could duplicate this lab and then see if they got the same results. Then here's the description of the results for each tool. Here is the first screenshot that shows filtering for DNS packets. Second tool, here's a picture. Now here's something where I might say, this is really pretty small here. What if I had taken this annotation here and put it over here and then used just this part of the picture? It would be bigger in the report. That's something I wouldn't take off for, but I might point out, because each time you do this, you get a chance to get a little bit better, because the clarity with which you can find the information in the visuals can make it a more useful reference document later and more clear to the people for whom you're producing this document. So each of the things that was done is documented here. It's described briefly. There's a picture that shows it very clearly, that it's labeled. And then when we get down here to the discussion, then each of those pictures can be referenced. So capture shows this, and a screenshot. Now, it doesn't say which screenshot. It doesn't say figure 1 here. So here's something I could suggest to improve. When you're discussing something and you're referencing a screenshot, reference its title, figure 1 or this screenshot. But nonetheless, again, this is very well written. It's very clean, clear, concise. And again, notice for each section of the discussion, there's a little bit of separation here. So if I had this as a baseline to use as a reference later, it wouldn't be some long paragraph, pages long, for me to try to figure in the middle of it, where did they talk about ZenMap? It's really clear. It's right here. There. And then he's making some conclusions about this, which was not necessarily part of the original request, but that's okay. And again, it's not too long, it's useful, it's thoughtful, and very well done. Now here's an example of a report that was generated after an early lab, and it was my first Wireshark capture. Now I've taken the name off of here, but the title, of course, the title of the lab was my first Wireshark capture, and that works well as a summary of the introduction, which the purpose of this lab is to do blah, blah, blah. There we go. And the title illustrates that in a few words. And then there's the methods very clearly. Now, this is the first writing of this lab, so I might suggest in my feedback here that, it doesn't need to be first person. It needs to be third person. So get rid of the I's and make it into third person. But no points are going to be deducted for that. Just point that out. Now again, here in the results, here's a good screen capture, the Wireshark capture screenshot. It's titled and labeled. Again, here's where I would suggest, look, if this is what is being talked about here, just this little bit of information here, look at all this stuff over here that should have been cropped out. So bring the file name and filter thing up here, crop it down to just what it is you're actually talking about, and then it's going to be so much bigger here. It's really going to be able to be seen and understood much more easily. And again, I wouldn't be taking off for that because they did the job, which was to do the Wireshark screenshot and to label it and put it in the report here. But they can continue to improve their work by making these visuals the most clear and understandable possible. Now I'm going to take a look at a report that I wrote. I just wrote up the situation that happened at one point when I was in a training and it didn't work. So the first thing I did, of course, was I booted up Wireshark. And then I grabbed it, and when I was all done, let's see, here's my report. And again, if I was handing this in to myself, I could say, well, gee, that's first person, not third person. But what I did, how I did it, what I saw, what it means. So basically there was a DNS failure. And then, of course, there was nothing I could do about it. Now I could write this up. This was done actually a few years ago before I had that formal set of headings to use. But the concept is, what am I doing? How did I do it? What did I see? What does it mean? So that was my initial rough draft. Well, here's what it looks like when I go ahead and I put that. Let's see, find it here. When I put it all together within our format. Title, word count, abstract. So the abstract is a summary of all the sections that went after it, not written until all those sections are done. A failure to access the internet gave an opportunity to use Wireshark to determine the cause of what could be done and not done. A DNS failure caused the problem, which is not something that could be fixed. This illustrates the value of understanding network conversations, etc. So in the space of a couple of sentences, I've summarized everything else. So now I know, well, if I'm looking at this, what does this represent? Is there something in there I'm looking for? Or am I interested in reading the rest? Here's the introduction that says what we did, basically. What was the job? The job was to try to figure out what happened at one of these breakout sessions where we suddenly couldn't access the internet. What were my methods? Here were my methods. What were my results? I started to see these things, DNS request and response. Here's my figure 1. It shows that pretty clearly. The IP address was trace file figure 2. Here's figure 2, highlighting what I found is the interesting piece of information. And again here, there should have been a URL IP match answer for each question. And here's my reference, rfc1035iana.org. So I found as a piece of information that was interesting that I kept getting back these server failure message. In other words, I actually got what this represents is a message coming back from the server. Not that my request got lost, but it actually got to the server and I got a reply that says, he's down. He's down. Server failure. Figure 3, a whole list of them, and they're all server failures. And again, I've cut this off so that all I'm seeing here is what I'm talking about in my description of what this figure 4 is. My figure 5, I've expanded the fields inside this packet so that I can highlight the things that I'm mentioning as useful information. And again, I'm indicating where I got that piece of information that I'm quoting here. Now here's my discussion. Well, the discussion is, etc., etc., figure 4, etc., etc., figure 2, etc., etc., figure 5. So where I'm discussing the information that was notated in the results, I'm indicating where that is. It's in figure 5. And that's it. Now we weren't able to fix this. This was science. It did not work. But what I've done is I've figured out where the problem was, even though I couldn't do something about it. So that's an example of the process, and this is an example of how to clean. And notice I took out all the I's. I made it all into third person. A failure to, in the breakout sessions, there's no I's in here anywhere. It's all third person. Clean, clear, crisp, concise. And again, notice I'm using spaces here so that it's visually easy to read. Very easy way to do formatting without anything fancy. Very cool. Well, to me. So, evaluating the writing. Was it good writing? Did it follow the rubric? Did it follow the job? If I need to take a look at that scorecard and try to score myself, what do I think? Is it generally good writing? I just want to mention that if you need some help in writing in general, that we have a reading and writing center, assistance center there at Chabot College. There's one at Las Positas as well. Tutoring for writing and reading. Now, lastly, let me give a couple of examples of what a citation looks like that's fine for me. So say, for instance, I'm writing, blah, blah, RS-232 uses 9 pins, and I'll say per Wikipedia. That's actually okay for me. English teachers, they're probably going to whack you on that one. They're going to want to have a citation, something like RS-232, and this even wouldn't work because it's not strictly MLA. But again, if you've written blah, 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 and then you say, per Wikipedia, maybe you want to put in citations for the RS-232 information that I wrote. It came from here. Now that's not MLA, but it's enough that someone could go back to your source for more information. It does not have to be perfect citation format as you might in your English 101 class. But it does. It gives credit where credit is due, tells me where I can go to find more information from the same source, which is the point. Another example, ping request is a type 0 from the TCP guide. And then citation, I might say, ping request was seen on TCP IP guide, page 514. And again, that's not MLA. It's good enough for me. It tells me you know that somebody else wrote this and you're telling me who that was. And then where I can go to read that again or find more information, which is the whole point. Often it's enough to just have an inline citation, they call it, just so someone could go back to that source for more information. For instance, for an example, ICMP time to live exceeded is a type code 11, and that comes from RFC 792. Great. I might put ietf.org in here. I could add if I wanted, but this is really good enough for me. It acknowledges to me that you know you didn't write that, and it tells me where it came from. So that's it. In a nutshell, well, maybe two nutshells, that is writing good reports and step by step on how to do that. So get out there, throw some stuff against the wall, do some science, write it up. See you on the